Okay, we're going to get started. It's Baltimore City Council Budget and Appropriations Committee. We're here today for Council Bill 20-0527, Ordinance of Estimates for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2021. Councilman Eric Costello from the 11th District, Chair of the committee. I'm joined by Council Vice President Sharon Green Middleton, 6th District, and Chambers. In addition, we have Councilwoman Mary Pat Clark, 14th District, Councilman Isaac Kitsy Schleifer, 5th District, Vice Chair of the committee, Councilman Leon Pinkett, 7th District, Councilwoman Shannon Sneed, 13th District.
Ed Reisinger, you see, am I connected?
Councilman Ed Reisinger, 10th District. And then on behalf of Mayor Jack Young, Nina Themelis, and Matthew Stegman, on behalf of Council President Scott, Dominic McAlilly, Rebecca Simmons, and Kaylin Young, we're here today for Fire Department and Office of Emergency Management. Chief Ford, please take it away, and please keep your presentation to 15 minutes.
Chairman, Councilman Constella, Vice Chair Pinkett, and all the members of this committee, I first want to thank you for the opportunity, your personal and professional commitment to the city. And again, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak about the fire department. Along with me, I have several individuals in the room. I have my Chief of Staff, Amy Beth Leisure. I also have my Chief of Operations, Chief Savella, who is online, Deputy Chief Thomas Tosh, who's in operations, Deputy Chief Dante Stewart as well. From EMS, I have Deputy Chief Jim Matz, Battalion Chief over infectious control. He's my infectious control officer, Tim Cullen. In training, I have Deputy Chief Shiloh. In community risk reduction, I have community risk reduction and also who cover logistics. I have Assistant Chief Chris Case. Over fire communications, dispatch, and IT, I have Deputy Chief Jim Pottinger. My fire marshal as well is online, Chief Derek Reddy. Over 911 communications, I have Captain Scott Brillman and Acting Director Tania Reddick. For community outreach, I have online Battalion Chief John Blake. Acting Logistic Deputy Chief Bud Grantlin. From my administration portion, Acting Director HR Lisa Woods. My Director of Fiscal Jim Fisher. My Chief's Assistant, the Assistant to the Chief, and Executive Assistant Chief, Chief Roman Clark. Blair Skinner as well as PIO. My Special Assistant, Simone Smart, my Deputy Chief of Safety, Kyle Caldwell. In emergency management, I have Acting Director, James Wallace, OEM Deputy Director, Administration and Finance, Jennifer Melody, OEM Finance and Administration Section Director, Chief Edmund Good. I'm sorry. I want to highlight a couple things, and I'll move on to the presentation. We've continued to experience higher call volumes until COVID-19, and then it kind of flattened out. But our members really stepped up to the increase of call volume that normally happens to this organization. In fact, we're per capita on EMS call volume, we're the second highest call volume organization in the entire country. We've continued to refine mobile integrated health community medicine, MIHCP, with the shepherding of Chief Matz, who is over EMS. Also, as we entered the pandemic, COVID-19, we reassumed the responsibility of the Office of Emergency Management through the leadership of Chief Savella, Chief Jay Wallace, and Captain Scott Brillman, who did outstanding jobs during that process, and also navigating through the protests we've experienced recently, as well as continuing the training. In fact, this week, directors did have a tabletop on possible hurricane mitigation and response in the city that was led by the Office of Emergency Management. In comparison to other fire response organizations of like size and like number of responses, we experienced a very, very low infection rate amongst other organizations in comparison and in respects to COVID-19. I've got to really give credit to PSI, our medical director, and in particular, Battalion Chief Tim Cullen, who is our infectious control officer, that did an outstanding job of making sure that we were consistent with taking care of our members, doing tracing, and making sure this exposure was always limited, and making sure that they wore proper PPE and they understood protocols, of which we continuously adapted to the circumstances throughout this whole process. I'd like to recognize the preparedness for COVID-19 by our logistics department, Chief Grantland and Assistant Chief Chris Case, that really got ahead of circumstances to the point where, from a PPE standpoint, the only challenge we had was with gowns, and they moved very rapidly to try to resolve that situation. But for all practical purposes, we had the proper number of N95s, and we still had a reasonable number of gowns. And I like to recognize them for assuming the responsibility of logistics systemically through the city in response to COVID-19. They always saw supplies in respect to COVID-19. And I'd like to pay great homage to our members that day after day, they showed up and did an outstanding job. During COVID-19, we did not have a drop of individuals coming to work. We did not have any issues with people showing any hesitancy for caring for this community under any circumstances, COVID-19 or any. So I really like to take the opportunity to recognize the outstanding work that they have done. So now I'd like to turn my attention to these slides. Next slide, please. Service number 600 is specifically fire administration for fiscal 2021 recommendation, of course, $11,500,556. This is the component, the arm of our organization that does executive leadership and handles a great deal of administrative responsibilities for our organizations like IT, human resources, workers' comp, general administration, and even safety to that extent. Laying within that is also the budget support of $1.6 million and $350,000 in unallocated federal and state grant funding. Next slide, please. Fire suppression is service number 602, fire suppression and emergency rescue. This is the 24-hour, 7-day-a-week response organization for fire suppression, rescue of all types. We have a very robust rescue organization that does an outstanding job. We've experienced floods. We've experienced several different things in the city. This is the organization that mitigates and is responsible for that. But just as important, and sometimes more important, this is the strongest arm of community outreach that the organization has. These are the individuals that go from door to door doing safety sweeps, trying to see if individuals have active smoke alarms. These are also the individuals that go to door when the city has hot button issues that they really want to reach out to the community because our people go door to door. We partner with other departments like Office of Mayor's Office of Employment Development in order to try to find occupations if there are hot button issues from Dr. Jaraza's department. We try to partner with them so we can make as big a footprint, as big a reach personally as we possibly can. This is also the area that is being supported. There's two suppression units are being supported from SAFER grant. We are going into the second year of our second SAFER grant. which we are being supported by the federal government at 65% for theirs. Next year, which begins, I believe, February, is the third year of the grant, and that at that point, it will be a 25% match. Next slide, please. Emergency management is 608. As I said, emergency management is the organization that does preparedness for the entire city. We did do led by OEM. We did a hurricane tabletop with the directors, and I think it went very well. I also want to give a point of attention to not just to our leaders of OEM who did an outstanding job of running it, but we could possibly be hit by hurricanes and other forces like that. One of the advantages that we do have right now is we have Commissioner Harrison, and during that tabletop, he was able to explain a lot of things that happened, not just during Katrina, but during several other hurricanes that they've dealt with that gave us insight. That's the importance of doing tabletop. So they did an outstanding job with that. So their job is to manage interagency and public-private sector programs to prevent and mitigate against any significant hazards. Next slide, please. Emergency medical services is 609. Emergency medical services fiscal 2021, $53 million, $53,720,000. This is the component. This is one of the components that I was speaking about. That is one of the busiest EMS organizations in the country. I think we're second business per capita, and I'm using per capita perspective. Per capita, I think we are ahead of New York, and it's going to be one of the first times I say this, Chief Matz. If I'm wrong, I'll look for your hand to correct me, but I believe I'm absolutely right. We strive to have if you look back at suppression, fire suppression line, we don't work on averages. We try to work on 90 percentiles, trying to get a response time 90% of the time. So our goal and I'm focusing on this because we're so busy. Our goal is in EMS in particular is to arrive 9 minutes, 90% of the time. On suppression, I think it's 5 minutes and 20 seconds. But 9 minutes, 90% of the time. We have not been able to completely reach that target because of the velocity of calls we get. But even with that being said, we still have EMS responses that arrive on these calls on easily on average of 4 to 5 minutes of units receiving the call, because on every suppression unit we have people that are emergency medically trained. They start right away providing patient care. The continuum services, they transfer them over to the EMS and our transport units that arrive. Consequently, we either treat them and release them, or we transport them to the hospital. Next slide, please. Fire emergency community outreach. This is 610. This is the arm of the department that that does community outreach, excuse me, and special events. From a community outreach perspective, they try to make sure that they orchestrate. They don't necessarily always do it because that is a very small personnel-wise. That's a small service number, but they utilize suppression and EMS in order to make the greatest impact in trying to educate the community about safety and trying to make as big a presence as we can from our department. Also, they are the ones that coordinate special events. So when there's special events that happen in the city, the request basically goes through that area, and it navigates out through to the shift commanders, who make sure that the adequate number of units or adequate number of staffing power there in order to mitigate those circumstances or to make sure that we handle that event properly. Next slide, please. Fire code enforcement. Fire code enforcement is 611. That's your fire inspectors, your building plan reviewers. These are the individuals that go out and make sure they evaluate the safety of our department by overseeing the codes, making sure that we do the codes properly, make sure that we do building inspections and we do plans review properly. This is one of the areas we, as we entered through COVID-19 and some of the challenges we had, and just as any other department in the city at that time, we had to put certain positions up in order to modify our budget or to try to limit our expenses. This is one of the areas we did it in the plans reviews, and this is one of the areas we were working on civilianizing as well. And those plan review positions were civilian plan positions. It is not going to stop us from being able to do what we're doing. We just have to do what we do smarter. So we're going to have to modify some of the processes we do. And we've already got plans to do that. Next slide, please. Fire investigation 612. This is the area that houses our fire investigators, those individuals who are called out, and they're called out as requested by either company officers or shift command. I mean, company officer or incident commander that's on the scene. In respects to, they always go out on larger alarms, but they can be requested for small incidences as needed by the incident commander that's on the scene. We have had a large number of fire investigation calls, in particular over the last year or two, specifically dealing with some of the arsons we had in West Baltimore. Next slide, please. Fire facility maintenance and replacement. 613 houses that organization. Those are the individual that group of individuals, or that service number covers the maintenance, of course, of our facilities, the upkeep and replacement of our fleet. To this end, what historically had been a challenge was trying to maintain our EMS fleet. We're doing very, very, very well with that. In fact, you can see based upon our goal, we're doing about 95% effectiveness on that. Right now, our challenge, if we're going to turn our attention toward anything, our challenges are our engine companies, where those are the ones that we're having shortfalls as far as getting turnarounds. And there's a whole lot of reasons for that, including the vendor that we have the apparatuses from, that they are very extended. To that end, I'm going to get ahead of this. We are in fact, we've already been in the process of looking at other vendors, and we are ordering other apparatuses to make sure that we can keep our units up in service as often and consistently as possible. Next slide, please. Fire communications and dispatch. This is the area that houses 911 and fire dispatch. 911 for the entire city. Approximately 1.4 million calls annually come through that service for police, fire, and other emergencies. Police, fire, EMS, of course, and other emergencies. It's 24-hour, 7-day-a-week organization. They have a quality assurance that does an outstanding job. They try to answer the calls within 10 seconds or less, 90% of the time, and they are actually meeting that very often. And I want to preemptively respond to this. Very often we have people that say that they've been put on hold or they get a busy signal. When we have major incidences and when we have many people call for an incident, people are put in the queues. And we always encourage them, do not hang up the phone, stay on the phone, because if they hang up the phone and call back, they'll get put in the queue again. In other words, a process, just like when you call someone an agency where you're trying to get in Southwest, I'll use that for an example. If you call Southwest, you'll hear someone say your call will be answered in a minute and such and such. If you hang up the phone and call back, you're going to get put further back in the line. So we like people to stay on the phone call. We do have a study that's in the process for 911 in order to learn more about best practices and other things. So we expect to get information on that, but 90% of the time we're doing very, very well. And our quality assurance component of 911 is doing a great job. Next slide, please. Fire training and education. This is the arm of our organization, 615, that maintains, excuse me, that maintains the competency of our organization as well as developing the growth of our organization. In many ways, this is the arm of the organization that, beyond the fire chief, that establishes the perspective and the mental aspects of the organization and how we're going to function with the public, not just from a competency standpoint, but a respect standpoint and other ways. So we're doing very effective services in this area. We're trying to figure out ways to better extend ourselves. 2 years ago, we went into doing more distant learning training, and we did that in an effort to make sure that we can get as much as we possibly can. At that time, it wasn't because of COVID-19. There are many things that do not translate in fire training to distant learning, but there are many things that really easily do. Those things that do, we've been in the process of trying to put those things in place. And Chief Shiloh is leading that charge right now, and she's doing an outstanding job. Next slide, please. Okay. So what I was in a loss for word for when I was talking about training, training has a great deal to do with the cultural aspect of the organization. And we're very attentive to that. We are a emergency service organization, but we're extraordinarily a customer service driven organization. We want our folks to treat our community with the highest level of respect and the highest level of competency and do it as efficiently and effectively as possible. So that concludes my PowerPoint presentations, and I prepare for any questions that you have to ask me.
Thank you, Chief Ford, for your presentation. The chair had to step away for a few, and so I'm going to start off with the questioning. Again, we thank you so much for the work that you and the fire department does for this city. You're definitely an essential part of this city moving forward, and we appreciate your team and all the firefighters that continue to work hard in the city. So I'm going to start off with my two questions, and then I'll go on with the rest of the council. My first question, last year we talked about converting uniform positions to civilian positions to help reduce overtime. Since then, how many of those positions have been converted, if any?
I'll have to get back to you the numbers, but I can tell you the areas that we focused on that we've already begun.
Okay.
Logistics is one. We're working on fire prevention, but we created two positions in the process of doing that, and so we've got to step back, but we are still moving forward with that. EMS is another one that we're moving forward with. We've introduced certain components of EMS that may have been done by sworn people that now we're moving toward using civilians.
Okay. And my second question, have you hired or appointed an individual to be the agency's equity coordinator?
Yes, that responsibility has passed over to my chief of staff, and we're also looking at the possibility of how we would leverage other members of the organization to help lead it.
Okay, so your chief of staff is basically the person in charge. Okay, thank
Yes,
you.
ma'am.
And I'll stop there and Let me see if anyone's
Madam
hand
Chair,
is raised.
Madam Chair, can I ask for clarification on that, please?
On the last question?
Yeah,
The
is the
equity
chief of
coordinator?
staff, yeah, is the chief of staff the equity coordinator, or is the chief of staff in charge of finding an
No,
equity coordinator?
I'm sorry. I should have been clear about that. Chief of Staff is the equity coordinator.
Did you get that?
Yeah, I
Councilman
got that.
Dorsey?
I don't believe that the intention of the law was to have a chief of staff doubling as that. I believe that there needs to be somebody individual specifically identified in that role.
Chief Ford, did you want to
Yes,
elaborate on that?
we from a I know I have a very large organization, but from an administrative standpoint, we are extraordinarily thin. In fact, this is, and I've worked at organizations that have 300 firefighters, 500 fire departments, 500 members. This is the thinnest administrative staff I've had. So I've had to put a lot of people in my department to cover a lot of things and to wear more hats than one. And this happens to be one of the components. But we are looking at as many opportunities. That's why I said I preface my statement by saying at this time, we're looking at opportunities of really possibly assigning it to a standalone person or try to get somebody, whether it be a contract or something. And we've tried in the past, but budgetarily, there's been challenges with us creating that position because we have run over budget the last couple of years. So there have been challenges with me trying to create that position.
Thank you, Chief Ford. And so we'll move down the list. Councilman Slifer, your hand is raised. Do you have your questions?
Yes, thank you. So a couple of things. I'll start with the first line in the fiscal 2021 budget highlights. Can you talk a little bit more about this proposal to disband the 2 fire suppression companies? Which companies those are, how that really came about, and what does that actually look like as far as response time with these 2 companies if they were to be disbanded?
We have been running, as I said, over budget over the last several years. We've run over our overtime budget my entire tenure here, and quite frankly, I at least went back to Chief Clack, and that's been the same since then. We are in the position where we're trying to make our budget whole by direction of leadership. We've got to figure out a way to try to work within our budget, and I understand that it's becoming more relevant now since we're going into some of the economic environments we're in right now. To that end, the only thing I have, most of my budget by over 90%, I believe, is people. And the best way we could figure out, and we downsized, like I said, around 7 positions, and that saved us close to $1 million. We are looking at the only other option we had beyond that, which we had to step beyond that, was to disband units. So I moved to possibly disband 2 units. That will save us possibly $2 to $3 million, and I'm not certain. And you can 4, okay, save us approximately $4 million in overtime. And what will happen is we'll repurpose those individuals throughout the organization, so we have a larger fill factor in respects to people who are sick or call in sick or take vacation, and us being able to backfill them without paying overtime. So that's generally where that comes from. We are in the process of doing an evaluation systemically throughout the city, using response CAD information and GIS information to make certain that it causes the least amount of impact on city response. We are also at this time we've historically, I'm going to use the first responding engine, NFPA 1710 We are above 90% of the time in FPA 1710 standards. In fact, we hover somewhere between 94 and 96% of the time of having a first arriving engine on the scene in within that time. To that end, we know it's going to cause some type of impact to the response time, but we believe we'll still be above 90% of the time. And so we're trying to use the data to make certain that the units that are disbanded, I need to say this, stations will not be closed. All stations, we have 39 stations now. Next year this time, even if we disband units, we will have 39 stations and units housed in those stations and people working out of those stations. So in closing, our goal is to try to cause as little impact to the city response as possible.
Right, and I get that, and I love you guys. I support you guys. You have a great staff, a great team. But the only thing that really matters here is the response time. When someone's having an emergency, is how quickly you guys get there. And honestly, and I know you guys have good metrics and you're working to achieve them. But even if you do achieve some of those response times that you outlined in the presentation, personally, I don't think they're good enough. I mean, if someone's having an emergency, and they call you guys, 9 minutes or whatever it may be is a lifetime to wait. And so certainly it's concerning when we hear things like disbanding units. So within that same question, have you decided where those units are going to be disbanded from? Do you have that in mind? Are they selected? Do you have a list that you're considering from? How's that work?
I haven't selected.
I'm sorry, can you also turn on video on, please, the agency head? I'm sorry, Councilman.
No
I
problem.
apologize. Didn't know it was off. We've already evaluated models of possible disbanding units. We have not solidified it at this time, but we have a few models, and we're running through perspectives, because not only do we have to change, not only are we going to disband the units, we have to change the response area for each unit, the box alarm responses for the units. So there are going to be some adjustments to all those. It's not something we haven't done before. We've done it before. In fact, we've changed response areas since I've been here. So we're moving down that way, and I want to point out that the first, I want to go back to this. I know Councilman Yitzi, you made a statement about 9 minutes too long. Our first arriving EMS unit, which is a suppression unit, is there well within the 1710 guidelines of NFPA standards. And they're EMS responding units, and that's within 5 minutes and 20 seconds of their response.
Right. So, I mean, Chief, come on. I mean, being within the guidelines and where we should be is a big difference. I mean, we both, I think, can agree that even the guidelines, which are outlined, they're reasonable guidelines to some extent. But I mean, if you're in the middle of an emergency, I mean, that is too long. And so I know that there's been shifts, which is why I'm so concerned when I see the disbanding of 2 units, because as you know, historically, my district has been on the end of these cuts in the past, and we've seen what that outcome looks like, and it hasn't been great. And so, if I can make the request, Vice President Middleton, to make it a committee request that that the committee receive, that list those models that they're considering, so that the committee can look at that prior to voting on this budget. So that's a committee request I'd like to make. The second.
Thank you. Have you done your 2 questions? So,
No, that was one. No, that was one. Can I ask a second one?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so my second question, is regarding EMS staffing levels. Can you talk a little bit more about the EMS staffing levels and steps that you guys have taken, especially now with the COVID situation where there was increase in call volumes? I had heard through the grapevine that there was some outsourcing being done in regards to ambulance EMS responses. So can you elaborate a little bit about that? How long that was in effect for, and was it effective, and what did that look like?
Okay. I'd like to have Chief Matz, if he's able to speak at this point.
Yes, good morning. My name is James Matz. I'm the Deputy Chief of EMS. Good morning, Vice Chairman Middleton and members of the City Council. Yes, with regard to what we did several novel initiatives during the COVID-19 response. One of those was the use of a commercial surge units. The other two areas were surrounding a viral syndrome pandemic triage. And we also did a medical professional triage line through communications and 911. With regard to the commercial surge, we basically partnered, developed, and actively implemented an EMS surge capability with a contracted commercial EMS service for anticipated surges in call volume as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. As reported by MIMS, our governing agency, our normal call volume runs approximately 400 to 600 calls per day. The state told us to plan for increased call volume that would go up to 800 to 1,200 calls per day. We were able to finalize a contract between the city and the commercial service. We actually leveraged an existing contract that they were using for a sedan service. We were able to finalize the training and the affiliation process. The actual affiliation process, we had to affiliate over 300 people because there was a contract with several subcontractors, some of which were MBE and WBE, so we had several come through. It was a smooth addition to our fleet. We actually implemented the units in a very mathematic scheme. We basically run with 26 full-time units a day. What we used was the number 24. So we brought units in groups of 8. So we did 8, 16, 24 would have been like doomsday scenario. We never got that bad. We actually ran them 7 days per week on 2 shifts from 7 to 3 and 3 to 11. Our peak hours are from 7 to roughly 11 o'clock at night. The units were staged actually in the 4 quadrants of the city, and they were used strictly to respond on our low acuity or basic life support service requests. We were able to finalize interoperable communications with them, essentially using our CAD and our mobile data terminal system, as well as a radio from the city. We actually formalized, we did 100% QA or quality assurance review on all of their transports. The program was actually started on April 6th with 8 units. About 2 weeks later, we surged up to 16 units because things were starting to go south with regard to all the performance metrics we were looking at with COVID-19. We actually stopped the program on Sunday, May 31st at 2,300 hours or 11 o'clock at night. What we're doing now, like we're doing with most of our programs, and I would recommend any of the other agencies that are doing this, we're actively assessing and evaluating the program for best practices, pearls and pitfalls. There's a real good chance that we're probably going to have to do this in the fall if things go the way they're heading. And that's it. I can answer any questions if you have.
So just as a follow-up to that, and then I'll stop my round of questioning because this will be my second question. What was the name of that company that you guys used? And also, can you provide the committee and the council that report once it's completed?
Certainly. The name was Heart to Heart Ambulance. They also used several subcontractors that included Free State, Eye Care Ambulance, and I can't recall the third name.
TaylorMade.
TaylorMade. Thank you.
TaylorMade, like the golf supply company?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
They're diversifying, I see.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess. That's actually MBE. It's local.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So we'll be more than happy to share any of the report that you would like. It's actually in process right now. The last I saw it was like 3 pages of bullets. We did a lot of stuff really good. There's a lot of stuff whenever you put these programs in effect. Honestly, the plan to do something like that should be 3 to 6 month process. We were actually able to do it in 2 weeks. We actually leveraged the EMS training staff to help us do it. So we made some hiccups. Like in the beginning, the very first day they sent them on a rescue, they can't go on a rescue. They're not set up for rescue with like turnout gear and stuff. That's what I mean by pearls and pitfalls. Some things worked well, some things didn't. So I'll be more than happy to share it when it's ready.
Yeah, that's great. It's definitely of interest to the council, considering we do need to increase these response times while operating more efficiently. So if financially it makes sense and response time increases or decreases, excuse me, then that's certainly something that's of interest to the council.
And there was, if you don't mind, I'm going to piggyback on what some of the stuff Chief Matt said. Thank you, ma'am. There were a lot of things we learned in the process, and there were a lot of things we learned early on. We had an opportunity to talk to Chief Scoggin, who is the fire chief in Seattle, and he basically he talked to my entire chief of staff 6 o'clock in the morning his time, because he wanted to talk to us before he went to work. And we literally went into COVID-19 with the fire department, EMS, and OEM kind of having a game plan, because we had a cheat sheet based upon his experiences. At that time, they were, I believe, 2 or 3 weeks into it. And that's the reason why we were well prepared from OEM standpoint and fire standpoint, EMS standpoint. And one of the things that we learned from talking to them is to make sure that we communicate. And they did a lot of bulletins, just like we do directives and memos. But what we came to the conclusion that we said we're not going to take a chance on this. We literally set up a COVID-19 email address where people can email us, and they emailed us, and we answered their questions in writing, but we also videotaped answers. You can literally go to YouTube right now and see the answers that each member of the leadership of the organization answered their questions, including our medical director. So we learned a lot in the process, but we did a lot of things right. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Chief Ford. Before we get to the next question, I saw Mr. Fisher's hand up, and I apologize. Were you going to respond on I guess it might have been one of the questions I had asked. Can you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I remember that back when you were asking the questions regarding equity and the equity position, and the clarification came up. We did have money in the budget last year and both this year. Last year for a position, this year for a contractor and for training. And we're going to still try to move that forward. And I believe Amy Beth Leisure, she is the lead on that, but that was in the budget. And I don't know if the Budget Bureau wants to comment on that or not, but that's where the funding is at this point.
Okay, thank you for that added piece.
You're welcome.
Chief Ford, did you want to add additional comment on that? Okay.
No, ma'am. I generally alluded to that when I was talking about our overruns on the budget and challenges we had.
Thank you.
Okay.
And Chair Costello is back, so he's back in charge.
Can you hear me okay? Okay. Speaking into the mic on the computer, but listening on my headphones. Marguerite. Yep. Gotcha. Chief, I just had 2 quick comments. One, I wanted to thank personally Chief Wallace, Chief Savala, and Captain Broman. They have done an absolutely outstanding job with the Emergency Operations Center and heading up OEM in the way that they have responded to what's going on in the city right now. And I think the position that we are in right now is directly attributable to their leadership. Our citizens have played a huge role in this, and they are the most important factor. But the OEM team has done a fantastic job. I've also been working very closely with Chief Wallace on the procurement of PPE from local makers and manufacturers as part of the mayor's Small Business Recovery Task Force. And Chief Wallace and his team have done an incredible job of making sure that we're expediting dollars to our local makers to produce that PPE for city employee needs. So one, I want to thank those folks. 2, I want to thank Chief Eames, Sean Eames, who, and I don't know if Chief Eames is on this call, he has done an incredible job in our work together on this outdoor seating and outdoor dining street closure program. Extremely innovative. And, you know, I feel like all the agencies have come together and kind of taken the approach of how do we become more innovative and support the customer and not just do things the way that we've done them because we've always done them that way. So I know you and I have talked about that, and I would just encourage you moving forward to try and think about how we can innovate those processes moving forward, especially when we're not in the middle of a crisis like we are now. So I just want to thank all those folks. They've done an incredible job. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, your camera was off. Just letting you know that in case there's a equipment problem.
I'm having nothing but equipment problems today. So thank you for letting me know, Councilman. Back to Council Vice President Middleton. Okay, the Vice President is having technical problems too. I'm going to pass it over to Vice Chair Pinkett. To Chair.
Can you hear me? I seem to be having seem like I'm having problems as well. So just checking,
Sir, I hear you, sir.
I hear you.
Okay.
I hear you.
You guys must all be using city equipment. My MacBook's working perfectly fine.
Well, good. So my first question for Chief Ward is out of Service 609, Emergency Medical Services. And specifically, wanted to look at the performance measure related to percentage of EMS fees collected versus total billable. Do you see where I am, Chief?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Okay.
That's all right. Which page are you on?
So I'm on page 128.
Okay.
Service 609. Percentage of EMS fees collected versus total billable.
Okay, I'm with you.
And it looks like it says the budget reflects $20 million in general fund savings due to those fees collected. Am I correct?
Jim Fisher, please.
Is Jim with us?
Jim, unmute your phone. Unmute.
Okay, sorry. We collect over 20 million now annually using the outside vendor for billing.
And it looks like in fiscal 2019, our target was 69%, but we achieved 56.5%. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
I definitely don't have the same research team that you all may have, but it appears to me if we would just first of all, if we would have hit the target, that we may have achieved almost another $5 or $6 million in savings. Do you agree that with that type of analysis?
Well, it's really dependent on the number of people that we transport, and Chief Matz can chime in on this as far as if they are eligible, if they have insurance or not. Our rates did change. I believe it was about 1.5 years ago. So that also has an effect on that percentage. So yeah.
What do we think? What do we think the savings could be if? I mean, have we done any analysis on what the savings would be if we were more efficient at collecting on those fees?
Well, again, we don't dun people. We send them free bills. We don't put them in. Go ahead, Chief.
Yeah, we changed, and Jim, you can, and Chief Matz, you can ring in on this if you don't mind. We changed the billing company about 6 or 7 years ago, in respects to urban municipal organizations, our collection rate is pretty decent. It certainly probably isn't as good as we'd like, or some other municipalities might be, but our collection rate is pretty decent. So I'm trying to wrap my mind around what efficiency. Chief Matz?
Sure. I'll just give you a quick history on EMS billing with the fire department. We started billing in 1989. We actually did it in-house, and what happened was I think they had a mayoral fellow do a research study on us outsourcing EMS billing from City Hall, and they recommended that we bring in a private vendor. The best that we had ever collected doing it ourselves was just under $1 million. We made approximately $900,000 in 1 year. We brought in a commercial vendor under named ACS, and they actually were purchased up by Xerox, and that's who we initially went from pen and paper actually to an electronic system to actually have an outsource, a third-party vendor. And we were able to realize up to just over $9 million at the height of that ACS Xerox. About 2012, we were contracted with Digitech, and Digitech actually took our income from $9 million a year to $20.2 million a year. We were collecting, they use it money per billable response as a metric that we usually look at. The best we ever realized with ACS Xerox was roughly $90 a bill. At this time, we're collecting over $200 a bill. Now, what Jim Fisher and Chief Ford had said about could we do better? We're doing a lot of things to try to get better. Actually, roughly a 60% collection rate is actually pretty good for EMS billing if you look around the country. The other thing that we were able to get an innovation grant for First Watch to help improve the quality of the reports that were actually being submitted by our personnel. One of the other drawback factors with what we can collect is through Medicare and Medicaid. Is it medically necessary? There are very strict rules on whether we can be paid to transport people to an emergency room. We're not paid currently we're not paid if somebody refuses. Like if I go to your house and you have a diabetic emergency and we fix you up, give you a little sugar shot and bring you back, if you opt not to go to the hospital, we can't collect income on that. If we give somebody naloxone or Narcan on the street, we can't collect for that. If we take somebody to the hospital that has a low acuity, a cut finger or something like that, they're going to say, from a Medicare standpoint, they can use another means to go to the hospital. Therefore, they're not going to pay it. So we're really trying to get every bit of income we can out of that, doing different, improved training for our personnel, improved hardware and IT, using the First Watch system. It's a work in progress, but I will say, due to COVID-19, I would anticipate that those numbers are probably going to be down because call volumes are down throughout the state and throughout the country. Just as a precursor, I'm just giving you a heads up on that piece.
Right. And Councilman Pinkett, I'm going to piggyback on some of what Chief Matt said, and I'm probably going to have him add to it. We've been very fortunate. One of the things that we've tried to do is be very as far on the cutting edge as we possibly can be. There's been state legislation that's been introduced that's allowed us to do more creative billing. I'm going to have Chief Matz talk about that. But the other thing is we applied to be one of the first organizations to go into a program that's called ET3. And ET3 is going to allow us to do billing for some of the things that Chief Matz talked about earlier for a certain patient that we treat and release, right? So we're going to be in the position where we'll be able to bill on those as well. So we're expecting some additional revenue. Chief Matz, could you talk about the state legislation?
Sure. Well, it's both state and it's the ET3 program. Basically, I'm going to piggyback on what we talked about earlier. We are the second busiest per capita system. Last year alone, we did over 150,000 calls for EMS service and transported just over 100,000 people to the hospital. That works out to be a transport every 5.2 minutes. The problem is with the way they had set this system up, this goes all the way back to the 1970s. Basically, the federal government incentivized us to only get paid if we take people to the hospital. Thereby, we're packing up the emergency rooms. It's like a self-defeating system, basically. Basically, last year, February of 2018, Chief Fletcher, my predecessor, and myself got called to DC, where CMS, the Centers for Medicare, were making an announcement. And basically, their announcement at that time was they were offering a 5-year innovation model that'll expand options to 40% of the services throughout the country. 40% of the private services as well as the emergency operation programs like we have. And some of the programs that they're going to allow us to do, if you were accepted to do that, was alternative destination. If we take somebody to the stabilization center right now, or if we take somebody to a dialysis center, we don't get paid. They'll all offer us to be able to be paid at our current rate. They're also offering treat and release functions. We're currently doing a pilot with the University of Maryland where we're actually, it's called Minor Definitive Care Now. Basically, an advanced level provider like a doctor or a nurse practitioner ride with a community paramedic, they go out and they co-dispatch on a low acuity call in West Baltimore. If it's an appropriate call and the patient agrees to it, they'll actually treat and release that patient free of charge right there. Basically, ET3 is offering that same program, but we'll be able to bill for that, and the physician can bill for that service. We'll be able to do that in all parts of the city. They're also offering to pay for telemedicine. COVID-19 has really been a huge evolution in medicine. You know, you hear about telemedicine before. I don't know about you. I had to do a telemedicine visit with my doctor last month. That's where everything's heading, and they're also going to pay for that. And there's also a component we didn't apply for, but we're looking at is to do a nurse in the triage center, a 911 call center. We're looking in that direction. They did award us we were awarded as being one of the 40% of the services in Maryland in February of 19. 1 year later, we were awarded. It was supposed to kick off in late spring, early summer, but because of COVID, they pushed everything off to the fall, which knowing the federal government might be a little slower than that. There's 3 phases to the ET3 program. Basically, what we're going to do is piggyback what we're currently doing in West Baltimore, which is going to be phase 1 or year 1. Year 2 is East Baltimore, which is essentially your Hopkins catchment area. And then year 3 is the rest of Baltimore. We got to take baby steps with these kind of programs and figure out, like I said before, figure out what you don't know. You're building a plane as we're flying it, so we're trying to work our way through that. With regard to implementation, we're working on legal agreements now. We're also working on our equipment with the iPads for the telemedicine component. We're finalizing some protocols with both MIMS and our medical directors who've been very forward thinking with that. And we're also working out the billing procedures. Digitech, the billing company I mentioned earlier, they're already doing this around the country. So essentially, they just have to flip a switch and we can get moving with that. Some of the partners that we're working with, in addition to working with the health department and BHSB, we're working with the Stabilization Center on Ashburton Street, University of Maryland's Urgent Care Center, Adullam Community Health, Total Healthcare, which has their 2 main facilities are on Division Street and Kirk Avenue, working with Independent Dialysis, AIDS Healthcare Foundation, Concentra, the UMS, or University of Maryland Dental Clinic, Transformational Health, which is essentially like a mental health component. And then individually, we have to work with individual providers. We're working with the University of Maryland providers and Hopkins. Hopkins is very excited about working with us as well. And that's all I have.
So
Okay.
what I'm gonna, the last thing I'm gonna say is we've had an opportunity. Everything that seems like to be a curse could be a blessing if you choose to make it that way. Every threat is an opportunity if you choose it. This COVID-19 has given us an opportunity to try a whole bunch of new things, and some of those things we're gonna keep either moving forward with, or we're gonna modify and bring it in the organization. And I'm very fortunate to have a lot of progressive people work with me.
Good. So I'm glad to hear all of the work that's going on, because I think there's tremendous potential in that particular area and service. So I'm glad to hear the things that are happening both locally and on the state. We'll go in this order based upon my screen. Councilman Henry.
Thank you. Good morning, Chief. Thank you for being here. Thank you for
Good morning, sir.
all of the work that you do, and your people for the work they do. I want to go back to a question that my colleague, Councilman Schleifer, had focused on under the fire suppression companies, which are proposed to be disbanded. I want to get some clarity on the reasoning behind it. Are you saying that you're proposing disbanding these 2 companies because the fire department made a conscious, proactive decision that it was improperly staffed? Or are you disbanding these 2 companies because you were told you needed to cut $4 million out of your budget and you thought this was the most effective way to do it?
We have budgetary shortfalls in our organization, and we had to make decisions based upon that. We were required to make decisions based upon that, and that's how we've gotten to where we are now.
Okay, so the reason I'm asking is because what you've stated is that you know you need to do this, but you have not yet done the part where you decide which 2 companies would actually get disbanded and how the rest of the companies would have their areas of service reevaluated and redone so that everybody is properly protected. I know you're trying to be thoughtful and rational in how you do this, and I appreciate that. But from our perspective, it would be irresponsible of us to simply accept that on a conceptual level without seeing the actual plan that you want to move to. Right now, we can ask you what companies exist and where do they cover, and you can show us that, and we can say, okay, then we will appropriate this much money to pay for that. But if you're going to propose that that's going to change, but you're telling us that that actual change is going to happen sometime next year after we've already signed off on the funding change, that's not really how we're supposed to be doing our work. I mean,
Right.
does that follow to you?
Yes, sir. I understand. I am very comfortable, sir, with laying out. I know Councilman Fleischer asked us to show the perspectives that we have as far as how we're going to disband units and what we're going to do thereafter. I am very comfortable with sharing that before you all make any decisions on the budget.
Okay, so you're saying that you're comfortable with getting us that information and potentially even returning to have another substantive conversation with us before the budget comes out on second reader.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much. No further questions.
Councilwoman Clark.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
thank you. Thank you. I want to follow up on these questions about these this cut to suppression units. And my question, similar to my colleague, both my colleagues. I'm against it. We've lived through it before. We're down, as far as I'm concerned, we're down to the bare needs in suppression now in the Baltimore City Fire Department. And you're going to keep the personnel so that we don't save money there, apparently. I don't know exactly. We save money that unit costs times 2. And it sounds as if the savings are very vague, 2 million to 3.2 million. Let me just say that I think that we should try to help the fire department get that money back and keep those companies because they play a vital role, and it is part of the safety that our citizens feel to know that the units they're now used to and relying on have not, in the middle of everything else in this world, disappeared. And so it's also, we don't know where that unit is. Those units are. But you know, and we know, it will be an uproar when that happens. It's not that we haven't done that already. It's not that we haven't bared down. So yes, we need to know what we need to try to help the fire department get in terms of actual money to hold on to those units, especially now when we're in a health crisis of monumental proportions. That's not a question. I'm just saying, I think that's extremely important for us to do for public safety and the perception of public safety and response. Secondly, I did want to ask a question, if I may, about 911. Chief, if you can hear what I say so that you can tell me whether I've got it straight or not. The fire department runs 911 for including the operators, the people that pick up the phone when you call 911. The police department runs the dispatchers who the operators talk to across the table and call and begin to call out dispatch for the different companies. That seems so here's my question. It's a specific one, although I think so what happened was the dispatchers, excuse me, the operators working with the fire department received an upgrade in pay. God bless them. They sure earned it. But what that did was it bumped the dispatchers so that the two roles were no longer in the same proximity to each other. And for a long time now, Human Resources has been investigating whether to raise, to bring them back into the compatibility comparison they had before. Did that happen? Do you know in the fire department whether operators and dispatchers have now both received increases so they're more in sync with each other?
Okay, I'm going to try to. I think I understand what you're asking, and Captain Brillman.
Do we have a peaceful? Do we have a?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
fair,
I need to start at the beginning what your statements were, just to make sure I had clarity to where
Yeah.
what you were talking about. And Captain Brillman,
yeah.
you or Tanita can correct me if I'm wrong. Please do that, because I want to make sure we're always accurate, right? So what we have right now is all 911 operators report. They fall under the auspices of the fire department. Every 911 operator, every time you pick up the phone, call 911, that person works for the fire department. Even if it's a police call that you make.
Yes.
The police department have their own dispatchers. The fire department have their own dispatchers as well. So if it's a fire call, the 911 operator takes the information, and actually while they're still on the phone with you, they forward that information to the fire department so they can start dispatching right away. And any additional information they have to type in is added during the dispatch call. The same thing happens if the call is a crime related or a police necessity call. It goes over to the police department at the same time they're typing in the information while actually the call should be dispatching, right? So that they each of those three entities, police dispatch, who answer to the police, fire dispatch, who answers to the fire department, and 911 operators are different entities. But within respects, and I'm gonna move forward to the last part of what you talked about.
I maybe we should have this offline, but I've been trying so hard to figure out.
I'm gonna try to close it out as quickly as I can. I'm trying to summarize as quickly as I can. 911 operators are in a different union than the fire dispatchers. They're in completely different unions. The 911 operators, based upon a survey or evaluation that was done on their responsibilities, have recently received a raise.
Right.
Yeah, have recently, just the 911 call takers.
Yeah.
The fire dispatchers are part of a different union that's actually in the process of negotiating right now, so they have not received raises in respects to that. But am I fair? And 911 operators are the ones that received the raise recently. So they're separate unions, separately distinct. So their raises are going to be moving at different times.
Okay.
Anything that has to do with them.
Let me just say out loud that, and thank you very much, Chief. And by the way, thank you very much for your leadership. Thank you. Thank you for helping us eliminate this elimination of two suppression companies, because it's crucial and we just don't want that to happen. And finally, if I can go way back in history, and we were just talking about the medic services that for that are billed through a vendor for the fire department. Jay, way back when that was put together, I just wanted to remind everyone, it was very much an issue that yes, we are billing for the 911 pickups and carrying to medical care to hospitals, okay? That was all instituted by actually my colleague at the time from the 5th District. And the issue was this. After 3 bills go out to the recipient ride to the hospital, that's the end. There's no credit report against that person. There's no more trying to collect because we wanted people to use the service. I'm not asking you to answer a question about that. I just want everyone to be reminded why that is. And that was part of the original legislation, and it was updated as we went along. So in the long run, we want people to use that service, especially our elderly, especially people that are worried about the cost, knowing that, yes, we should pay if we can. But after 3 bills, that's the end of it for that person being billed or have any credit problems with the city of Baltimore or anyone else.
Okay.
And I thank you very much because that was 3 different issues.
Okay, I'm
Yeah.
not going to respond to that, but there's something I should have said that I haven't recognized. Our 911 operators, I didn't say anything about them early on. They are doing an amazing job.
Indeed.
That is one of the most underappreciated positions in emergency response because they are where our response begins. They are the connection we have with the community. And very often they get to hear all the challenges and all the problems and the heartbreaking circumstances, and they don't have the satiety of being able to see it completed to its end. And they don't get appreciated. So I just wanted to say
I couldn't agree with you more. I want to see
Councilwoman Clark,
equity.
we're gonna move on.
Okay, I appreciate
No, ma.
it. There
Thank you.
needs to be equity.
No, I understand.
Partners.
Is
Thank you, everybody.
President Scott still with us? President Scott?
Yes, sir. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Sorry.
Chair, and thank you. It's okay. And thank you, Chief Ford, and thank you to all the work that the women and men of the department have done, especially during COVID-19. I know that it's a trying time for everyone. I wanted to start off actually where Councilwoman Clark left off about 911. And Chief, you know how I, for a long time, have been saying that both you and you and BPD are taking a lot of calls and things that really maybe should go to one or the other in other places. And we know that some other cities, for example, when you call 911, they've added in something that it says like, do you need police, fire, or do you need like mental health assistance? Have you guys considered moving us to that kind of model? And if you have, where are you in that process? And if not, why not?
Well, what I'm hoping is, recently we've been having a study done on 911, and what I'm hoping is those recommendations would guide us into best practices, and that's what I expect to see.
But I guess a follow-up question, Chief, is that in that study, and I don't know, someone can you mute yourself, Councilwoman Clark?
I'm sorry, Councilman, I didn't understand.
Councilwoman Clark,
Yeah.
control the thing, please mute Councilwoman Clark.
Excuse me, what?
Mr. President, something's breaking up.
Hang
I
on,
can't,
hang on. Councilwoman Clark, please mute yourself.
I can't get to it to mute. That's what I've been trying to find it. I lost.
Okay. Are you looking
I apologize.
Councilwoman, it's okay. Are you looking at WebEx right now?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've been doing it.
Councilwoman, the bottom of your screen, there should be 6 circles.
I know.
On the far left, there's a mute button. Do you see that?
I don't. It's not there. I know what you mean. I'll tell you what. I'm just going to try to leave because
No, don't do that. Don't do that. Hang on, Councilwoman.
I just can't. I use them.
Councilwoman, it's okay. Hang on. We'll get it fixed.
I'm sorry. Usually I can't get on. Now I can't get off.
And I actually think it was somebody else's phone because we can now hear better. We don't hear that outside noise that we were hearing.
Yeah.
So I think it was somebody else.
Okay, well then maybe you can proceed and somehow something will happen and I'll be able to get out. Or I'll be able
Yep,
to.
it's fine.
Just hang on one second. Everything's gonna be all right. We're gonna get through this together here.
There we go. Thank you. No, Chief, the follow-up question is this. In the study, and I don't know if you can talk to that or finance or someone else, in the study, do we specifically ask about adding a mental health component, or what are we asking in the study? Because if we ask them to study 911 as we exist today, then of course they're not going to come back and say that because we didn't ask them to look at that.
Captain Brillman, can you answer that question?
Yes, sir. In the past 2 years, and most recently in the past 6 months, we've been working with the mental health community and the BPD. There's a full team that is working to divert a lot of these mental health calls to another service. So the BPD does not have to respond out. The fire department doesn't have to respond out, and these folks can get the proper care that they need, not the fire and the police department. So we're working on it. We have the operators and all the dispatchers have already been through a pretty intense training, and then we just developed, I think it's a 2-day training for everyone, which will be rolled out it was supposed to be rolled out around this time, but COVID kind of pushed it in the next few months. So it's well on its way.
Yeah, thank you. And Scott, thank you for that. But I guess the question was, the chief referenced a study that we're doing of 911. And my question was simply to say, when whoever or the organization that's doing the study, did we specifically ask them to look at whether we need to break up our 911 calls between police, fire, and totally between mental health issues or not? Because we're going to get back and study based on the questions and things that we asked them.
That's correct. They are looking at all aspects of our whole system, from the start of the call to the end of the call, including non-emergency calls, 311, DPW, DOT. They're looking at the whole system and the type of call, and we will be getting feedback on that.
And how, when did the study begin and when do we expect it to end?
We should be getting, the study has ended. It's been going on for the past, I think, 6 to 8 months. It was included in a statewide study. So every jurisdiction, there was a study to kind of bring all 24 jurisdictions in Maryland to a next gen world, to make sure 911 centers were doing all the same things. So if you call 911 from Howard County, you'll get the same service as you would call from the city. So we should be getting results very soon.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to seeing that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions are done for now.
Councilman Pinkett, you have the gavel.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So, Councilwoman Sneed.
Thank you. Chief Ford, can you, I know we have recently appointed 2 new assistant chiefs within the department. Are those individuals currently city residents as required by the law that we put in?
They are not currently city residents.
Okay. But they're working on it.
we are reassessing the org structure as well. I'm leaving that perspective up to them, but I am reassessing the org structure of our department anyway.
Okay. And since our last labor hearings, can you talk about how we've are going to be able to achieve diversity in the upper ranks and leadership positions? Can you
Yep.
talk about where we are?
Absolutely. I put together a group, and I haven't been able to follow up with them because of COVID-19. I put together a diverse group that Chief Savella oversaw, and they met out at training several times to make recommendations. And the bulk of the concentration is how to open up opportunities systemically for people, but I was focusing more on EMS because they have fewer opportunities, and that's where the representation from female are mostly at in our department. And I was supposed to meet with them, but I haven't met with them primarily because COVID-19 and we had so much going on there. Chief Savella, if you want to, can you tell me generally where you're at? And I'm gonna end it by talking about recruitment, because that's the most important component to this.
Yes, sir. So the committee met several times, and actually the new director of training, Chief Shiloh, she is on that committee as well. So they put together several goals and how we're looking. We were meeting every other month. Chief McConnell was taking the lead. Chief Maya McConnell was taking the lead on that. And they were trying to evaluate the best practices for creating upward mobility for everyone within the department, whether they're EMS or suppression, as well as the staffing portion of it as well. They have some general ideas that they've been working on. But then again, we had got to a point where the COVID-19 sort of slowed down those meetings. And I believe our last meeting was just after the new year. And that's kind of where we are. But the committee is still in progress. They were looking at other jurisdictions, how they do things, how they have their process set up. And they're evaluating it. And I believe they were at a point where they were ready to make an initial presentation to Chief Ford as far as their progress has gone. But then, of course, with all this coming along, that got put on hold at this point in time. So that's kind of where we are with that right now. So the most important thing we can have as far in respects to diversity and inclusion in the upper ranks of the organization is seeking diversity and inclusion and opportunities, specifically bringing people in the department. And that's been one of my biggest goals. If we create the pools large enough to get hired, we can create the pools large enough to mitigate diversity throughout the entire organization. And if we create the environment, we have created a chapter of women in the fire service over the last, I think it's been 3 or 4 months ago. I literally met with around 25 women in our organization. It was about another issue, but this is what I focused on. So our goal, we have a goal on trying to increase diversity from represent gender women in the larger, higher levels of the organization, but it is going to be a process.
Thank you. Those are my 2 questions for right now.
Councilman Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been on and off for a little bit, so apologies if this has already been asked. But Chief, wanted to look at Service 608, where there's a full defunding of the executive director. Looks like of OEM. Can you speak to the decision to defund that position, or am I interpreting that incorrectly? And if it is correct, can we speak to how the agency intends to continue to operate that department?
Councilman, this is Daniel Ramos from BBMR. It's not a defunding, it's just transferring it over to the federal grants, to a federal grant.
Okay. Okay. So there's it's going to be, you already have the funds for that position from a
Yes,
federal
sir.
grant, or is it anticipation of?
No. It's grant. It's a regular grant that we receive. I'm not sure. I can get you the exact grant when I'm back in the office.
Okay.
But it's a regular recurring grant.
Okay. So I guess the other question I'd have then is, where are we in the process of filling that position? I know early on during the pandemic, the director was placed on leave. Has that position been filled, or can someone provide an update on the status of that?
Yeah, we currently have Chief Jay Wallace overseeing OEM, Captain Brillman being the deputy in that position of running it, and it falls under the auspices of operations in the fire department. So it falls under the umbrella of Chief Steve Savella. Right now, we haven't moved on filling the positions because of COVID-19. They are literally doing. Okay, they are literally doing an outstanding job right now. So we're trying to make it past our immediate circumstances before we pay attention to filling it. I mean, literally, they were put in place, and I think for some reason I'm thinking February the 20th, Chief Savella, literally at the beginning of COVID-19. I can't remember if it March the 20th or I don't remember the exact date, but it was literally the beginning. And in fact, one of the first things they did was activate the EOC, go into full activation because of COVID-19. So we really haven't had a chance. And then after that, we started dealing with the protests. So we really haven't had a chance to do anything but try to keep mitigating circumstances.
And I understand that, and it was certainly not any questioning of the emergency response. I've been working with the JIC the whole time and the EOC, so very much pleased with the response overall, and shouted out those crews on one of our earlier hearings. My only hesitation with a continued delay, as you know, flooding was a significant issue in my district back in 2018, and we are entering the summer months. Late August is when we hit hurricane season. You mentioned that earlier about that emergency response, and my concern is that I would hope that by that point we would have that position filled. Or I do know that the timing of filling positions can take some period of time, and so my hope is that there would be someone in that position that can take the lead as we enter that, because I know it's not only my district, but the Frederick Avenue corridor, Liberty Heights corridor, Forest Park Avenue corridor, Violetville communities over in the 10th district went through a tremendous amount of harm due to those storms that we had back in 2018 in May and in July, and that the Office of Emergency Management, specifically the former director, was very central in navigating that response, and we are still responding to that. We actually have a meeting this evening with communities in that area to talk about the continued efforts to mitigate the flooding along that corridor, and so. And just trying to figure out who the point person is. I've had some difficulty trying to figure out who to talk to get updates on that. I found it now, so I'm not asking, it's not a request of your office, but early on we were in preparation for that or getting questions about where we were. I did have some challenges. I'm good to go now, but just wanted to flag that as a concern.
Okay, I want to point out, if any of you all have any questions, concerns about the Office of Emergency Management, I want you to feel free to call Chief Jay Wallace. He is one who's managing the everyday components of emergency management. Councilman Burnett, I want you to know that the tabletop we just recently had spoke of all the locations you just talked about. In fact, 50% or better of that tabletop focused on what we would do in those circumstances dealing with those communities.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Reitzinger.
Thank you. Chief, first of all, I want to thank you and the men and women of the department for the great service they do for the citizens of Baltimore. My question is regards to public safety and the closing of those two, not stations, but companies. And you want us to vote or support the recommendation, but do you have a conceptual model that you can show the council of those two companies where they're located? And if they are closed, what is the impact that it's going to have regards to that area, that footprint, if they're closed? Is it, and also, are they companies, are they engine? Are they truck companies? Are they squads? Can you answer any of that yet?
Okay. They're going to have to be, the likelihood is it's going to have to be engine companies. And I will, as I stated, before you receive that info, before you have to vote on it, well before you have to vote on it, I'm going to get the information to you. In fact, after this meeting, I'm going to meet with my staff, and we've been talking about it all along. And I'm going to find out when the earliest time is I can get the information to you all with the perspectives that we have. Yes.
Chief, I
Yes, sir.
just want to chime in, just so you're aware, we could be voting on this budget tomorrow evening, as early as tomorrow evening,
Okay.
or as late as Monday morning. So I just
All
want
right.
you to be clear on what those timeframes are.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
With the request.
Yeah, Mr. Chair and Chief, this is my issue, that in the past, no offense, they would have a map of the city with the model of if a engine or truck company is on call, where's the nearest other engine or truck company? And before I could vote on a budget, I have to see that and get those answers, because in the beginning, we're saying that we're the second busiest, and the first response, if I'm correct, on a call is the engine company if it's a fire. So if we're going to eliminate that to save money, what effect does that have again to that area?
Yes, sir.
And have those answers. I have
Yes,
to
sir.
have the answers.
Understood. I will get you that information right away.
And my second question, Mr. Chair, to the chief, what is budget management? How much did they request that the fire department has to cut?
Initially, the request was, the initial request in respects to COVID-19, I believe, was $1 million. And that's when we came up with the initial positions. But the conversation all along had been closer to around $4 million, because I think that's where we ran over budget. Am I correct, Daniel? So the $1 million was associated with COVID-19. I think $4 million was associated with our overtime budget, our overrun and overtime.
Okay, so you're looking at 3 million overtime.
No.
No.
In all, it would generally be around $5 million. The $1 million is related to the issues in respects to the city of COVID. The $4 million would be associated with the overtime we have sustained over the last couple of years continuously.
Yeah, it's again, and I'll end, Mr. Chair, what is the efficiency when you're saying 90% within 5 or 4 minutes? What effect that will have with the citizens of Baltimore? Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Dorsey.
And Vice Chair Pinkett, just one thing I wanted to add.
Okay, go ahead.
We can go past 11 a.m. We are not back here for hearings until 12:30 to 3, which we have rec and parks. So please feel free to not. I'm sure the chief would like nothing more than to spend the rest of the day with us anyway. So.
Thank you, Chairman Costello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chief, I'm following up on my request from a year ago. Last year, I made a request for a comprehensive study of take-home vehicles, and I'd like to know the status of that. The department has reported having somewhere around 42 take-home vehicles, and I want to know if the department has done anything to reduce that number, how many vehicles are being driven back and forth out of state, and what the status is on having a take-home vehicle policy.
Chief Case, if you can start and to answer that question, I'm going to come behind you afterwards.
Yes, sir. Currently, since last year, we've reduced our take-home vehicles. Our current list is 37, down from 45. We do have a take-home vehicle policy in place. That's what I got right now. What else you need, sir?
As in, you have a written take-home vehicle policy that you can forward to me right now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right, I'd like to have that. I appreciate it. So I guess of those 37, how many are being driven out of state?
I'll check the list and I'll get back to you on that.
And why are we down from 45 to 37? What the department?
Yeah, Councilman Dorsey, I've been here 6 years, and I've even had the opportunity to talk to Chief Clack at certain conferences. It's a practice that we go through. I go through every few years, every 2 or 3 years, trying to evaluate who has cars, who actually needs cars, and who doesn't, in response to what we're trying to do as an organization. So that number has gone down twice, but it could very well go up depending on circumstances. Case in point, we have a medical director, and I think it's very likely he will get a car, and I don't know if he's on that list. So the numbers may go up or down based upon the needs of the organization, but more often than not, they've gone down. And
has our policy evaluated the type of vehicles? Look, we got, based on my recollection from last year, we have employees who are driving SUVs 45 minutes to get into the city from wherever they live. And the supposed justification is that we need them to be able to get quickly to where they need to go in emergency circumstances. But if you're driving 45 minutes to get to work, first of all, we shouldn't be paying for you to burn fuel in an SUV. Second of all, if you're driving that far, what vehicle you're driving is not making a difference as to whether or not you can do your job. So I guess I want to know not just what the policy is, but what the detail level of justification is for approving, for rationalizing the issuance of vehicles.
Yeah, the type of vehicle is more or less driven by the recommendation based upon the person's responsibility and skill set. We do, and I'm using that in general perspective because that's generally the same thing we do with our apparatus committee. We have a group of individuals that evaluates when we talk about engines and truck companies and ambulances. We have a group of people who get together and say, here's what we need in respects to the kind of apparatus, and they go through the specifications of that. So, and generally that's what it's been based on, but we'll get you as much information as we can on that.
Yeah, because I guess I can't wrap my head around the idea of if we're saying that somebody's got to have an SUV in order for it to be able to transport some volume of medical supplies or something in it, and they're driving 45 minutes, we better damn well have somebody else have already got to that scene with that equipment before that person got there from 45 minutes away. So I really can't understand how we would justify on that kind of basis. We need to be, so that's the one issue that I need some answers on. the other issue that I've asked about for the last 2 years was about fire watch locations. What's the status of fire watch, and what were the findings of the report that I requested on funds recovered from Rosemont Towers?
Yeah, I think we sent you a report thereafter, but Chief Reddy, if you can elaborate on anything with Councilman Dorsey.
Yes, so in reference to the Rosemont Towers, we billed them $758,160, of which we can account for $705,026. $57,624 was billed to HBAC, or the HABC, Housing Authority of Baltimore City, and we would have to check with finance to see if that was paid.
I guess the number that I haven't heard there, or perhaps you can clarify this, is, well, I understand what you build and who you build it to, and I understand whether or not you're able to collect it or you've been paid it, but does that account for what it actually cost the department to perform the duties? Because last I checked, we were not even billing as much as we were paying in order to do this. This is essentially, this is the fire department's version of what the police department does when it lets the Orioles pay for police officers, but not as much as it costs the city to actually put those officers on the street.
We have a base fee, and depending on the employee, the seniority, and there's a lot of different things that may go in with that individual. Their expense may change. Their actual expense may change. Consequently, there are the very likelihood that the person that we're putting down their firewalls costs more than the benchmark cost of that individual, because we have to tell people what it's going to cost at a benchmark level so they can financially prepare for it. It doesn't necessarily always meet there, and that would be accurate. That would be reasonable. Is that correct to say, Chief Reddy?
Yes, and going back to the last time the fee schedule was updated by the City Council was 2011. According to the 2011 fee schedule, the maximum that we can charge for a fire watch, or the maximum we can charge for any event, is $45 per hour. That's capped by the City Council from 2011.
Say that again. We have a cap legislatively, you said, from the City Council?
Yeah, we have
I know we have a 45, I believe it's $45 that we charge per hour, and that's automatically what we charge. Now, if those adjustment fees have to be adjusted, that's we actually believe all our fees need to be adjusted, and because there are several areas we need to look at our fees.
So, but I want specific clarification here. I heard that I just heard that we have a cap that was something that has something to do with the City Council.
No.
I can't attest the legislation. No, I can't attest the legislation, but there is a standard that of $45 that we are charging, and it is consistent with what we've sent through finance, and we need to reassess all of our expenses, and in particular in fire prevention, quite frankly.
All right, so look, I've been asking about, this is my third year now asking about Firewatch. If the last 2 years have not been enough for us to address that, when you say you know that it needs to be addressed, what's it going to take? What you're explaining to me is a policy that essentially runs against everything that I know about how billing for services works in common practice. When the city of Baltimore contracts to have a building constructed, the contractor doesn't bill the same thing for, they don't bill a flat rate for the electrical apprentices and the electrical journeymen and the master electrician. They bill the hourly rate for the master electrician, the journeyman, the apprentice, that there's no reason that we shouldn't be collecting for what we're actually putting in the field. And if Rosemont Towers can't accept that, or whoever else can't accept that we have to actually bill to recover for our services rendered, then some other plan is going to have to be devised.
I do believe this, Councilman Dorsey. I believe there should be, people should know if they're going to have Firewatch or any other services, how much it is going to cost them per hour, period. They need to go into it knowing so they can budget for it. I think that's a reasonable business perspective. That's no difference than what happens if we send an ambulance out to respond and pick somebody up. I only have 2 people on that ambulance, but if I line each ambulance up and look at the cost of each personnel, each one of them are going to be different. But we have a set billing process for them. So that's kind of the way I see this, and I think that's reasonable. Now, I still say this. We need to reevaluate our billing because it has not been updated and we have not increased it, and it does need to be increased. I agree with that totally.
Yeah, I guess my point is that the flat rate billing practice that you just described through this analogy of EMS, that's one thing if your flat rate is set high enough that that you're never gonna be in the red. But we're running in the red right now.
Would not argue with you about that at all, sir.
I don't want to come back here next year and find that we're still in the red with this thing. Thank you, that's all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Vice President Middleton, I'm not certain if you had an opportunity to ask your question.
I had 2 questions at the beginning. I'm going to pass on this one.
Okay, I think that everyone has had an opportunity to ask at least their initial questions. Is there anyone, any of my colleagues that have additional questions, if you would make that known at this time?
Yes, I have a additional question, Councilman.
Okay, Councilwoman Sneed.
For my additional question, was curious. I wanted to follow up from my last question in reference to the staff, and I just wanted to know if we figured out with the extremely high turnover rate of the senior staff and command staff, like have we figured out why it's so high? Have people been doing exit interviews when they leave?
Usually when you make it to the senior staff level, we have conversations with people who choose to retire. I've had individuals who retired because one of my assistant chiefs retired really early, and the concept he retired really early, he had something that happened in his family that made him evaluate. In fact, I had a couple of them do this, that made them evaluate what was going on in their lives and how they wanted to enjoy their life. But if you have people in the fire department who retired 30, 35, 40 years old, they've reached the benchmark of their career, where from their perspective at a deputy chief or assistant chief level, maybe even a battalion chief level, and many times they want to enjoy their lives. They want to do other things. I've got people who've gone on to other careers, even started working with other fire departments. That's been most of the dynamics. Certainly not all of them. Certainly some people have left frustrated, but and that's any organization, especially at this size, at this level and this size of the organization. Excuse me.
Thank you. My other question, when we talk about, I just want to reach over to EMS positions, and since 80%, 85% of our calls for service are EMS related, have you ever considered creating an assistant chief of EMS?
Yes, ma'am. I've considered, talked about it, and I'm still evaluating it.
Okay. Thank you. Those are my 2 questions.
Thank you, Councilwoman Sneed. Chief Ford, I have a question in reference to Service 602, fire suppression and emergency rescue. I know you mentioned a little while ago about the $4 million of overtime, but there's a note under this service that talks about the SAFER grant and the fact that that grant was sought to address overtime. Is there Can you speak to that? And then also, is
Yeah.
there opportunity to apply for additional funds under the SAFER grant? Is that an option that's available to us?
We, Councilman Pinkett, Vice Chair, we went after SAFER grant approximately 5 years ago. I went under on the previous administration who said in order for me to maintain one of my units, because the funding was not there, I needed to find the funding myself. And at that time, we were overrunning our overtime budget. I went after not just one SAFER unit, I went after two. I got both of them. I thought by going after the second one, I would be able to offset the overtime. That was my goal. The overtime continued to increase, and it did not. It offset it in a very minor way for a very short amount of time. So I was allowed to go after SAFER again under the next administration. The overtime continued to go up, and we find ourselves where we are now. SAFER has changed so much. Also, it used to be a time they paid 100%. They've even changed it. I think the two times we've gone for it, and Madam Chief of Staff, if I'm incorrect, you can correct me on that one. But I think they've changed it. Each time we've gone for it. They've had fewer people go after SAFER recently. Even this last time they opened it up, it was supposed to close June 30th. May 30th, and they extended it an additional month. Am I correct?
Chief Ford, I'm sorry. This is Amy Beth Lazier, Chief of Staff. I believe they extended it to May 30th.
Oh, so it's already passed. And the challenge, the concern that we had of going into SAFER is the fact that when you get SAFER, you can't make modifications to your personnel in any form or fashion. You have to maintain the same level of services and things like that. And those ties were concerning from a perspective from administration, because if something happened to the budget, they need to be able to make the latitude to make the decision. And you don't need to apply for any national grants, any federal grants, knowing that it is a great possibility for you to turn it down because it compromises you for other additional federal grants, not just in the fire department either, because it makes you look like you don't go after grants in good faith. And the reason why they extended it, because a lot of people, even though there's a lot of fire departments literally laying off people, so they wouldn't go after the grant. That's the reason why they extended it.
No, thank you. And that was my similar assessment when I looked at it as well. But so thank you. I had another question from Service 611, Fire Code Enforcement. The percent of fire inspections completed within 10 business days received through CSR. Fiscal 2019 had a target of 75% with the actual of 30. Can you speak to what we need to do to improve our percentage in that area?
I think that issue had ended up being an IT issue. Chief Reddy, could you comment on that one? Could you comment on it?
Yeah, that was, as Chief Ford alluded to, that was an IT issue. We have improved that. And that's all I can say on that.
Yeah. I think.
Where are we now?
Within the 10 period, we should be mighty close to that 75, if not have exceeded it. I'll get back to you on it.
Okay, thank you, sir. My last question is Service 615. And maybe I just didn't notice this before, maybe we talked about it, but the number of vehicle collisions, the target for fiscal 2019 was 260 and actual was 297. Maybe I'm wrong. It just seems like a lot of collisions. Can you speak to what we're doing to minimize the number of collisions?
Yeah, there are many things we do. We send people through training when we realize we have problems in certain areas. We have training courses all the time. We have a committee that evaluates accidents and calls and tries to focus, sends people through remediation training. But we also look at the situation when we have continuous training in continuous incidents in certain areas. We go back and train the entire organization. That's a perspective of quality assurance, and that's based partly on the committee and partly on our safety chief's oversight. Now, the other thing we do have is we do have drive cam, and that's in our system. What's been the most important thing in respects to the collisions is that we've been able to go back and look at them. And even though we've had more collisions, our workers' comp has gone down because we've been able to evaluate the conditions of the accidents in respects to the possible workers' comp issue.
Okay, thank you. And is there a dollar amount that's associated with those collisions? And
yeah,
and
I can get that to you, sir.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going back through my colleagues to see if there are any additional questions. Going once, going twice. Seeing that there are no further questions, this committee is now in recess until 12:30, when we will have Baltimore City Rec and Parks. Thank you, Chief Ford and your team, for your continued service to our city.
Thank you all for your commitment to the city. Thanks, members.
Thank you.